Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to part 10 of my Music Theory for Producers course. In this video, I want to talk about diatonic intervals, and also talk about the quality of chords or triads as they relate back to the major chord. We're going to avoid other non-diatonic intervals, all this stuff, until the next video. And we'll also later, a couple of videos down the road, we'll find another way to create chords using the circle of fifths. And then later on, we'll actually use another method to create chords using another method. But for now, I more or less just want to show you guys diatonic intervals, how they relate to the major chord and the minor chord, and then figure out the four qualities of triads or chords. And we'll talk about the difference between those two terms in a moment as well. For all four types of chords. So what I've got here is I've got a C major scale, all white keys, and an A major scale, all white keys. An interval, one interval that we talked about was the distance between two octaves, like C and C. That's a very easy interval to understand. It's two notes that have the same name, but their frequency is doubled or halved. There's all these other intervals within the scale, and that's really what the word diatonic means. It means intervals that exist within a particular scale or key. So if I were to take this bottom note here, this bottom C, duplicate it, and then I'm just going to duplicate it a bunch of times. There you go. So we basically have one note of C underneath each note in the scale. What we've done is we've created a diatonic interval between all of these. Now, one thing that we're not really going to get into in this video is naming the qualities of the intervals. As you can see from this chart, which is much more complicated, we talk about augmented, perfect, major, minor, and diminished musical intervals, interval qualities. So all intervals, let me pull it back up, all intervals have like a number to them, which is like the distance, and then the qualities, like a perfect unison one, minor second, major second, minor third, major third. We're going to ignore the quality part just for today, and we're just going to refer to them by the number. So when you have two notes, now I know it's only one note right now, but when you have two notes together playing in unison, it's just called a unison. You could also, it's referred to on paper as a one, but we can call it a unison. When you have two notes that are a step away from each other in the scale, again, not a half step, a step away from each other in the scale. Again, that's what diatonic means, staying within the scale of the key. You have a second. So C to D here is a second. And you guessed it, the next one is a third. So you have two notes that are a step and another step apart. So a way to think about this is, rather than thinking about it vertically like this, you can more or less think of it like this. Like here's C. If I go up 1, 2, that's a second. 1, 2, 3, that's a third. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a fifth. So that's where all these are derived from. So you have a unison, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and then finally an octave. Now the same thing goes for the minor scale. We can do the exact same thing. A to B is a second, A to C is a third, A to D is a fourth, A to E is a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and then finally an octave. So how does this matter? Well, let's say that we had a vocal harmony or something like that we're trying to create, and we're not really sure how to harmonize. And I've talked about this in some of my Melodyne videos and flex pitch videos. Is you can shift up the notes using flex pitch or flex time and create harmonies, but you have to stay within key. You have to stay diatonic. So one thing I don't want you to think is that all intervals are formed off the bottom note. They can actually be formed off of other notes. Like for instance, if I want to harmonize G here with a note B, those two notes are a third apart. You just count 1, 2, 3. Likewise, if I say E here, I want to go up a fourth from E. I just count up the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. So a fourth above E is A. So this is what it looks like in the score editor. And I actually find it a little bit easier to look at in the score editor because you can see like the distance. So unison, they're right next to each other as a second. Line is a third. Line space is, or space line, whatever, is a fourth. Line again is a fifth. So the ones that you want to recognize here to understand, to start building a chord out of this, is the first, the third, and the fifth. And that's why the scale degrees are referred to in that way, because it sort of corresponds to their interval in comparison back to the tonic note C. In this case, in other scales, it's going to be a different tonic. So not everything relates back to C. Things can relate back to whatever the bottom note of the scalar key you're working with is. So in C major, if we take the first, the third, and the fifth note, C, E, and G, we actually get the C major chord. And likewise, you can do that with every single scale. If I took the D major scale and put it up here, and then took the first, third, and fifth chord, I would get the D major chord. Likewise, with minor keys, here's A minor. If I take the first, the third, and the fifth, A, C, E, we get A minor chord. Likewise, if I switch this over to E flat minor, the first, third, and fifth notes would make up the E flat minor chord. Now, that's a very long way, like a very difficult way to figure out chords, to have to figure out the scale for every single chord that you're working with, and that doesn't account for other types of chords like augmented chords and diminished chords. That's not the point I want to make here. The point I want to make is that I want you to see how triads or chords are created by essentially skipping a note and then skipping a note again within a scale. Like, for instance, I could start here on E, skip a note, go up to the next one, so I'm up a third, and then go up another third, and that's another type of chord. We're not going to talk about what type it is yet, but that's another type of chord. You can do that for every single note in any scale. You can just start on a note, go up a third, then go up another third, and you can create a chord. You can create a triad. So let's talk about those two terms, because I keep using them over and over again. A chord is essentially any cluster of notes, if you will, that sort of stick to some key. So CEG is a C major chord. GBD is a G major chord. EGB is a E minor chord. The word triad is specifically represents chords that only have three notes in them: C, E, G, D, F, A, F, A, C. So there's three notes in each of those three chords. There are chords out there with more than three notes. We're not ready to talk about those yet, but there's seventh chords, ninth chords, chords that just add an extra harmony to them. Those are chords we're not really ready to talk about. Let's just start with the C major chord, which is C, E, G. You can see it's got quite like a nice, bright, like a stereotypical happy sound to it. The minor chord, A minor, A, C, E. It's got more of like a somber tone to it. But both of these chords are both triads because they only have three notes in them: A, C, E, or C, E, G. So let's just start with C, E, G. Let me delete everything that's here, and I'll just put C, E. Oh, that's not an E. G. There we go. I'll just pull these out. And what I'm going to do is duplicate this chord 4 times. So I've got the C major chord 4 times. What I want to show you is I want to show you the 4 types of chords or triads, 4 qualities of triads in relation to the C major triad. And this is going to come in handy later when we start building chord progressions based off of the circle of fifths and another tool which we haven't gotten to yet. If you take, well, first of all, let's talk about what each note of each chord is called. The bottom note is called the root. The middle note is called the third because it's up a third from the root. And the top note is called the fifth. It's called the fifth because it's up a fifth from the root. So root, third, fifth. You can create all four qualities of triads just by altering a couple notes from the C major chord, or from any chord really. the bottom note, the root, is always going to stay the same, because we wouldn't be able to call these C chords. Like if I shifted C up to C sharp, well, now that's a C sharp chord. It's not a C chord anymore. I can't refer to it with the letter C. It'd have to be C sharp or D flat. So let's figure out the minor triad. The only difference between a major and a minor triad is the middle note, the third. So if we take E and we lower it down a half step to E flat, we get the C minor chord, or C minor triad, C, E flat, G. Now, if we lower the third, like we did in the minor triad, and also lower the fifth, the G goes down to G flat, we have what's called the diminished triad. It's, I would say 90% of the time, major and minor triads are used in popular music. Diminished triads are less common, but they're not unheard of. They're usually used to transition to another chord. We'll talk about that later. Though a type of triad that's very I'm going to say unpopular, but very it's just not used quite as much in popular music, is the augmented triad. To create an augmented triad, you take the major triad and you take the fifth and you move it up a half step. So in Score Editor, these look like this. Now they don't look correct. Let me just do the enharmonic shift to flat for the diminished chord. Nope, that's not what we want. I'm going to do sharps to flats. There we go. And then this one's going to be flats to sharps. And I'll show you why I'm doing that in just a moment. So again, major triad, C, E, G. Minor triad, we lowered the third down a half step to E flat. Diminished triad, we lowered the third and the fifth down a half step. And then augmented triad, we raised the fifth up. So how do we know, just like when we were talking about scales, how do we know to go with a flat over a sharp? Why not call a C minor triad C, D sharp, G? Well, because once again, just like with the scales, you have to keep this alphabetic order. C, E, G is the first, third, and fifth note of the C major scale. C, E flat is the third note of C minor, and G is the fifth note. You have to, this middle note is always going to be named E. This top note is always going to be named G. Notice that if you take the sharps and flats away, all four of these look identical on the staff. They're line, line, line. And if it's a chord that starts on a space, it's going to be space, space, space. So it always maintains that structure. All C chords are going to be C, E, G, just with some altered notes. So the third and C minor, we just lower the third, so it becomes E flat, not D sharp. So it's still an E. With diminished, we lower the E down to E flat. We lower the G down to G flat, not F sharp, because again, that G has to be maintained. And then for the augmented chord, we actually sharp the G. We don't go up to A flat like it did earlier where I had to switch it, because again, we have to maintain C, E, G. All C chords are going to be C, E, G. Likewise, let me just shift this whole thing up. This is one of the wonderful things about piano roll that you can't really do with the score editor, is let me just shift this up to another chord. Let's go up to D. So now I have D major, D minor, D diminished, and D augmented. Now, for these, actually, it did all these perfectly, yep. So, naturally, the D major chord is D, F sharp, A, and that's because the third note of D major is F sharp, and the fifth note is A. If we lower the third, F sharp, down a half step, it becomes F natural. So D, F, A is D minor. If we then lower the fifth down in addition to the third, A natural becomes A flat, not G sharp, because again, we're maintaining the A across all of the chords. And then likewise, if we go augmented, we go back to the F sharp in the third, and then we raise the fifth, A becomes A sharp. We don't use B flat because again, we're maintaining that A across all four chords. And I just realized I haven't played you the chords yet, so let me just play them for you a couple times so you can hear what they sound like, in reference to the major chord. So those are the 4 types, 4 qualities of triads. And then earlier we had talked about diatonic intervals. I decided to throw this video in here. I was going to jump straight to creating chords off the circle of fifths, but I decided to throw this video in here as sort of a primer to that, because I feel like if I didn't at least talk about the different triad structures here, I would have to take extra time in another video doing so, and it would probably make that video more confusing. So those are just your 4 main triad qualities and diatonic intervals. In the next video, we will move on to other musical intervals, and then we will move on to creating chords using the circle of fifths. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.